Glad you're here. Look at this full room for Second Step. I am delighted that you're here. Give yourselves a hand. Table leaders, would you stand? We want to honor you because your part in these weeks, so crucial, so crucial. This does not happen without our table leader. Our first and second step leadership team, would you stand? My wife Karen, Lisa, Heather, who else? That's it? Yeah, that's our team. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. This is 4 weeks. Second step is 4 weeks. We ask you to come to all 4 if at all possible because every week matters. If you have to miss, we do allow 1. So 3 out of 4 to complete second step, but absolutely come to all 4 if you can. Now, everybody's already been given your second step participants guide. Go ahead and grab that, put it in your hand. And what I want you to do is look at the memory verse for the week coming up. Our memory verse for this coming week is 1 Corinthians 12:7. And this is a topic that some of you are going to go, what? What is that? We're going to talk about it. A spiritual gift is given to each of us so we can help each other. Say it with me. A spiritual gift is given to each of us so we can help each other. So, we're going to talk today about living out your purpose, which really means finding your spiritual gift and deploying that spiritual gift for the work of God and for the sake of others. For the work of God and for the sake of others. It means living out your purpose. So in the Bible, we do discover that God has a plan and a purpose for every one of us, and that plan includes serving one another. And so there's a little clip that we're going to show that comes from the life of Jesus. So let me set this clip up. Very near the end of Jesus' life, Jesus is having a meal with his disciples. And one of the big practices of Judaism was washing. You had to wash your hands a certain way. In Judaism, your hands extended from the elbow all the way to the fingertips. You had to wash, ceremonial cleansing. Because people didn't have closed shoes, people would arrive to dinner with dirty feet. The lowest household servant would be tasked with washing the feet of all the guests. So if we're having this would be a banquet. We would have servants come to you before you're eating, and they would wash your feet as a courtesy and because of Jewish custom for cleansing. But it'd be the lowest servant. So the followers of Jesus are all gathered. There is no such servant in the room, it appears. Jesus stands up and he does something very bold. He takes off his robe. He would have only had like a loincloth on still. He wraps clothing around his waist, gets a basin of water, and he goes disciple to disciple to disciple, and he begins to wash their feet. Now, Peter was the most obnoxious disciple. He was the one, he had the best heart, but dude, he had no filter. And he's like, you're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus said, Peter, if I don't wash your feet, none of you's clean. In other words, you've got to allow me to do my cleaning work, even deeper cleaning, heart cleaning. But it was a metaphor. You won't be clean at all if I don't wash your feet. And Peter says, well, then wash my feet and wash all of me. But what was stunning about the scene is that the greatest became the servant. And in that, we have a model for how Christians are to live. Not with arrogance, but with humility. Not living to be served, but to serve. And so watch this clip.
It was now the day before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. He had always loved those in the world who were his own, and he loved them to the very end. Jesus and his disciples were at supper. The devil had already put into the heart of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, the thought of betraying Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him complete power. He knew that he had come from God and was going to God. So he rose from the table, took off his outer garment, and tied a towel round his waist. Then he poured some water into a wash basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel around his waist. He came to Simon Peter.
Are you going to wash my feet, Lord?
You do not understand now what I am doing, but you will understand later.
Never, at any time, will you wash my feet.
If I do not wash your feet, you will no longer be my disciple.
Lord, do not wash only my feet, and wash my hands and head too.
Couple of things about that clip. First of all, Jesus with a British accent's awesome. That was probably the way it was. I'm just thinking that it had to be that way. The second thing, now what we're going to do is give everybody handy wipes. You're going to wash each other's feet, so take off your shoes. I'm kidding. Because culturally we wouldn't do that, but we would serve one another. What I want you to do is take a few minutes at your table for some table discussion and answer the question, why do you think Jesus did that? Why did Jesus, like the greatest one in the room, why did he take on that role and wash his disciples' feet? Take it just a couple minutes. You know, no right or wrong. Just give your opinion why you think Jesus did that. All right, all right. Let me just ask you, could a couple of you extroverts, you know, I won't put anybody on the spot that doesn't want to, just holler out a couple of the answers. Like, why do you think Jesus did that? Humility. As he was a teacher, he's teaching. He was an equal. Show love. I heard another one. Say it again. To be of service. To set an example. That's exactly right. It had to be shocking to the disciples because they knew who was supposed to do it, and the one they didn't anticipate doing it is the one who did it. It was a counter-cultural idea. Like a real issue is where people expect to have it all about them. Like, what's in it for me? And Jesus is like, no. Rather than what's in it for me, how may I be of service to you? And I'm telling you, that's a whole different idea. I'm pretty excited about the teaching time that we're going to have over this week and the next two especially. The fourth week is a big graduation thing, and there is some teaching, but these 3 weeks in a row here, we're going to be teaching kind of along the big theme of serving and connecting. If the first 4 weeks of First Step, and some of you who are here who did the old membership step, if that experience was connecting to Christ, this step is connecting to his church. And we're going to learn that together. So, as we watch this video, I want you to be asking the question, God, what do you want to teach me today? So let that be in your mind. God, what do you want to teach me today as we watch this video together? Here we go. Hi, I'm glad you're here at Second Step. I'm Brad, and I'm excited to share with you today some core principles of really being a follower of Jesus and being a part of the church. Now think with me for a moment about the difference between going to a restaurant and going to a family dinner. Now hang with me and think about this. When you go to a restaurant, you just sit down and you order your food. You expect that someone's going to bring food out to you. And if you don't like the food, or if it's overcooked, if it's not done to your taste, you send it back and you ask them to fix it. You might even grab a comment card and let them know about your experience. It was really good or it was really bad. And I want to tell you, all that's fine at a restaurant. But it doesn't work that way at home, at least not in my home. At the family dinner, everybody chips in. Everybody does something. One person ices the drink, another sets the table. Some people cook, some people do the dishes afterwards. It's all hands on deck for the family dinner. Now, if you sit down at a family dinner and you say, hey, somebody bring me my food, you're probably going to get an earful. You don't send back food at the family dinner. Man, if you do that, you don't value your life. And you never, ever ask your mom for a comment card. When the meal is over at a restaurant, you pay, you're finished, you're just a customer. But after a family dinner, you have to stay to help clean up. And you thank the people that cook the food because you're involved. There are two very different environments. One is if you consume. The other is if you contribute. Now, some people treat church like a restaurant. They walk in with all kinds of consumer mentalities that ask things like, what are you going to serve me today? I want the music to be great. I want the message to be awesome. I want to be inspired. Brad, make me laugh. Make me feel good and lift it up. And if not, I'm going to be upset. But you know, the church is really not like a restaurant. In fact, I'd suggest to you that the Bible claims that the church is actually more like a family. And we're part of the church, which means we're part of that family. And that means it's all hands on deck. I mean, we see this at the first church community. The book of Acts in the New Testament tells the history of those first followers of Jesus and the beginning of the church. Now listen to this in Acts chapter 2, beginning in verse 42. All the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to sharing in meals, that included Lord's Supper, and to prayer. A deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And the believers met together in one place, and they shared everything they had. Now, when it says all the believers, it's really referring in that verse to something that had just happened, which is that 3,000 people were baptized after Peter shared the first message after Jesus ascended into heaven. It's the beginning of the church, and thousands of people are suddenly sharing life together. And they're like a family. They learned the Bible together, they prayed together, they ate together, they served together, they shared responsibility. This picture of the early church is really why we at California Community Church don't have members. We have church owners. See, membership suggests privileges. Ownership suggests responsibility. Families are built on people owning their responsibility, and the church is no different. In fact, this is how we would define an owner at California Community Church. An owner is someone who realizes that they've been bought with a price, that they belong to Jesus and their life is not their own. Therefore, they're committed to making disciples for Christ, and they've surrendered their time, talent, and resources to God's purposes in the church. That's an owner. An owner is somebody who jumps in and begins to contribute. I mean, nobody walks into a restaurant, looks around and says, wow, that wall really needs to be painted. Maybe I should do something about that, and so you jump up and paint the wall. If the restaurant seems understaffed at rush hour, nobody jumps in to help the restaurant staff in that situation. Nobody looks at the tables and says, those tables are all beat up. They need new tables. I think I'll pay for some new tables for the restaurant. You do that in a restaurant, people are going to think you're crazy. But in the church is a family, and we do things differently. We all contribute. You jump in and help, so do I. You take things on yourself because you're an owner in this family, so you contribute and you get involved. You use your gifts to serve because it isn't about you. And it's not about me. It's all about God and serving Him and each other. So, for the next few sessions, we're going to look at some of the characteristics of ownership in the early church community. And the first one that we're going to look at today is serving. We see the importance of this in Acts chapter 6. In fact, this is what we read. But as the believers rapidly multiplied, there were rumblings of discontent. rumblings of discontent. Now, this is a season when the church is growing by leaps and bounds. I already told you, 3,000 people received Christ as the church began. Another 2,000 people were added shortly thereafter. I mean, the last figure given in Acts 4 says about 5,000 men were part of the church. So if you add to that figure women and young people, my goodness. Some have suggested that first church in Jerusalem could have grown to 20,000 people who were a part of that large church community. Just brings me to a point that sometimes we want to criticize a church for its size, but from the beginning there were large churches and there were small churches. Size is not the most important factor of a church community, but it's looking to Jesus and seeking to stay true to his teaching and what's most important. In fact, the size of the early church, along with the explosive growth, left them little time to adjust. So as a result, the apostles could no longer handle the load of caring for the congregation. Further organization was needed, and people needed to realize the impact that they could have by getting involved. What we see is that as all this was going on, there were rumblings of discontent. I mean, there were people that were frustrated. See, a church can be thriving and growing, and there can still be rumblings of discontent. I've always said the church would be a perfect place if there weren't people in it. But there are people in it. In fact, we're all about people. So inevitably, needs are going to be missed, people are going to get their feelings hurt, and mistakes are going to be made, because we're people. It's no different at our church than you see in the book of Acts. I mean, you don't leave your family just because somebody got hurt. You don't leave a church family just because things didn't go your way. Instead, you jump in and you try to be a part of the solution together. And if you want to discover excitement in your faith, then listen and look around your church for needs that could be met if you were to get involved. I've talked to people who've been around here for a while, and sometimes they'll say things like, I just don't feel like it's my family anymore. I've lost this sense of connection. You know what my first question always is? Where are you serving? Where are you involved? You have to get involved in serving. You just jump in. If you're going to make a connection, if you're going to feel a connection, if you want this place to feel like family, then you have to be involved. See, if a church doesn't feel like family, you need to serve. You need to contribute. See, people say, no, I need to separate. No, you don't need to separate. You need to serve. Don't treat church like a restaurant. Well, I didn't have a good experience, so I'm not going back to that restaurant. Treat it like a family, and church will start to feel like a family because we're all in it together. In fact, the first thing we see in Acts chapter 6 is a reminder to simply consider the needs around us. Consider the needs around you. Acts chapter 6, verse 1. There's rumblings of discontent. The church is growing. Believers are rapidly multiplying, and here's what we see. It says that the Greek-speaking believers complained about the Hebrew-speaking believers, saying that their widows were being discriminated against in the daily distribution of food. Here's what was going on. Jerusalem had this large minority of Hellenistic or Greek-speaking Jews. They often spoke no Hebrew because they'd lived abroad for many generations and now they've returned to Jerusalem. It was their holy city. But there was this cultural tension between them, kind of the newcomers and the Greek speakers, and the Hebrew-speaking Jews who'd stayed in that area their whole lives. So when the church began to merge these two backgrounds and people would come together and they're supposed to be unified in Christ, the Greek-speaking widows felt like they were being shorted. And the other widows, for instance, received like maybe 2 loaves of bread while the Greek speakers only got 1. At least that's the way they saw it. And so they complained about it. They're getting more than me. Someone paid more attention to them than me. Now the offense may have been more imagined than actual, but it doesn't make any difference because they felt overlooked. So there were needs that needed to be addressed. And you know, even today, you look around Cal Church and there are so many needs that continually need to be addressed. From our hospitality ministry to our children's ministry, our student ministry, our groups, our care ministries, our compassion ministries, the work we do in feeding the homeless. I mean, there are so many ways you can get involved. And here's the deal. If you don't use your unique gifts, and I don't use my unique gifts, there are going to be people that need to be encouraged, and they're not going to be encouraged. There's going to be people who need help, and they're not going to receive help. People who need to be challenged, and they won't be challenged. I mean, the only way that we can meet all the needs around us is if we all jump in together. So I want to challenge you to consider the needs around you today and get in the game. Serve others with your gifts. That really leads us to another principle, which is simply this: serve others with your gifts. In the early church, they heard the needs, and then they figured out ways to address them. Some said the apostles needed to take care of this problem about the Greek-speaking Jews and the Hebrew-speaking Jews, and the apostles needed basically to take care of everything else too. But that's not what happened. Look at this. Acts chapter 6, beginning in verse 2. The 12, that's the apostles, called a meeting of all the believers, thousands of them, and they said, "We apostles should spend our time teaching the Word of God, not running a food program. And so, brothers," they said, "select 7 men who are well respected and full of the Spirit and wisdom, and we'll give them this responsibility. Then we apostles can spend our time in prayer and teaching the Word." Now, I want you to catch this. The 12 apostles that are mentioned here, I mean, they'd been with Jesus, they'd learned from him, they were his original disciples, they heard these needs, they called everybody together, and they made a distinction between the needs and who was to do what. The apostles said they were commissioned by God to teach the Bible. That was their job. And they were to pray for the church, and they were to serve in a pastoral function, and they needed other people to take their gifts and cover other functions and other needs. So one of the gifts isn't better than the other, but in the original language, the same word is used to describe the work of teaching and the work of distributing food. I serve in this way in the church. You're going to serve in that way in the church. Others will serve in their way. It's the work of ministry. It's the work of service. And that's no accident. One's not superior to another. What I do or what you do isn't better than what someone else does. It's just unique. But all the needs of the church require people full of God's Spirit who possess wisdom. So we need all types of people. We need those with the gifts of leadership, the gifts of faith or prayer or hospitality or teaching, to use their gifts to serve in the church. But you can imagine, I'm asked on a daily basis to do all kinds of things. The needs are very real. But I learned years ago it's not my responsibility to personally meet every need. I just can't, and I'm not even qualified to. My responsibility is to ensure that we're doing everything we can to raise up those who have gifts, who can meet all the needs of the church. My responsibility is prayer and a teaching role and providing spiritual leadership in the church. I don't know what your responsibility is, but it's connected to your gifts. You use your gifts to serve others in the church. It takes everyone to make a difference. Now, no matter what our gifts are, we're all servants with a service to do as we follow Christ. So listen, when you receive Jesus, something supernaturally happens in you. The Bible says you receive a spiritual gift, a spiritual ability to serve other people. It's a gift He gives you so that you can do special things that God has planned for your life. In fact, in the Bible, we see over 20 different examples of spiritual gifts that are given by God, and it probably isn't an exhaustive list. Romans chapter 12, verse 8 in the New Testament says this: "If your gift is to encourage others, then be encouraging. If it's giving, give generously. If God's given you leadership ability, then take that responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift of showing kindness to others, do it gladly." He says some of you have the gift of encouragement, others the gift of giving. There are people who love to be generous. They love to give, and some of you in this room have that gift. Some of you maybe have the gift of helps. The gift of helps is just what it sounds like. It's this ability to just help in practical ways to free up and support other ministries. You're the first one to say, "Let me help. How can I help?" There are other gifts, gifts of teaching, gifts of prayer, gifts of faith, gifts of healing. You have a mix of gifts that God has given you. Whenever we use these gifts in our church family and we serve others, the end result is that God's message goes out and lives are changed. Look what happened in Acts when the early church spread responsibility to each other and they all began to utilize their gifts, when they all treated the church like a family, not like a restaurant, when it wasn't simply about what they could get out of it, but what they could contribute to it. Acts chapter 6, verse 7 tells us the immediate impact that was a result of this shift in thinking. It says this: So God's message continued to spread. The number of believers greatly increased in Jerusalem, and many of the Jewish priests were converted also. That's awesome. The church grew. People's lives were impacted. God's hope took root in the community. So how do you discover your gifts? Like you may be saying, but I don't even know what my gifts are. Well, you can fill out a survey. You can take a gifts test. There are a lot of things you can do. You can try serving in a position for 30 days and just try to use a gift. Just try something. So often, we act like our lives are at a red light waiting for the light to turn green before we do anything. God, I'm just waiting for a green light. We want to know exactly what God wants us to do and all the details before we hit the gas pedal. And I just want you to assume right now that all the lights at the church are green. Just let God stop you when he wants to put up a red light. Just start doing something and experience the joy of serving. I think you'll find that God will show up right in the middle of it, and you'll begin to realize what your gifts are, and you'll begin to realize what some of your gifts aren't. Somebody wrote me and said this about spiritual gifts. They said, my life used to be about one thing, about me. I was a self-serving guy who had neither purpose nor passion. I was leading a miserable life. I was throwing away time and money on alcohol and cheap thrills. And one day I walked into church and I heard the message of Christ, to give your life away to others so that you can find your life. He says, I didn't have much to give, but I also didn't have much to lose, so I decided to give it a shot. And that's when my life started to change, and Christ became more real to me. I started serving, and I found a purpose and a reason for my existence. And today my life is richer than I ever believed it could be. Serving others made the difference. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. Friends, for you today, I want to challenge you to try serving somewhere for 30 days. Just get in the game. Just serve. Now you can take a gifts analysis. We'll talk about that later. You can jump in and do something. Treat your church like a family, and it will start to feel like a family. Just get started somewhere and watch what God does in your lives. Thank you, guys, and God bless you. So what I want you to do right now at your table as a group discussion is just share one thing like that spoke to you during that video. Like, this one thing I learned, that's the part that jumped out at me. Just share. Go ahead, take like 2 minutes, go really, really fast, something that you learned or jumped out at you from the video. All right. I know there's more time that you could spend on that, but we've got something exciting coming up in a second. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for all of it. You know, many people in our church first came in with one point of view, and then they made that shift from restaurant to family, like from member to owner, and then they jumped in, and their experience here has been so rich. We have so many people who have found a place to serve that's rewarding, fulfilling. It matches their gift set. If you are serving regularly in a place in our church, would you stand, because I want to recognize you. That's so great. That is so great.